Now let's go ahead and test the Slugify instance title method itself. So to do this, inside of our tests, let's import this utility function. So we'll do from.utils import test or the Slugify instance title. So now I'm going to go ahead and define test Slugify instance title of self. And so what we're going to do is we're going to grab an object and we'll use article.objects.all and we'll just grab the last one in there. And so this object, of course, is going to allow me to use the utility function because I can actually pass in the instance to it. And so what I want to do is say new slugs, and I'm going to set that to an empty list. And then I'm going to go ahead and say unique slugs and set that equal to a list of a set of new slugs. Now you might be aware that set will remove all of the duplicates in any given list. And so then turning it back into a list is important. And then I'll go ahead and do self.assert not equal. And we're going to go ahead and, or rather assert equal. We want to make sure that these two lists are actually the same length. So I'll just go ahead and do length of that and the length of that. Okay. So of course, right now, if I ran it, it would be the same. But what I want to do is I want to run something simple. So I'll do for I in range. So I just want to run a certain range here from 0 to 5. And we're going to go ahead and create new slugs in here. So what I want to do is I'm going to pass in this Slugify utility, and it actually returns back an object itself. So we'll go ahead and say instance equals to Slugify instance title. We'll pass in the object itself. I'll go ahead and say save equals to false. And now I'll go ahead and say new slug equals to the instance.slug, or really simply, I can just do new slugs.append that instance.slug. And so if I run this, it should actually create new slugs each time on this Slugify instance title. So it's going to run it with Python manage.py, test articles, hit enter, and it looks like things are successful. But this is a false sense of security because I didn't actually test that many of this Slugify instance. All I've really tested is, well, 5. That's actually not even close to what we hope to have in the future. So if I did something like 5, or let's do 50,000. Now you may or may not want to do this, but if I run this now, it's going to take a lot of time to actually run this test. And if I did a smaller test, maybe I would show the results a little bit sooner. But the idea here is to actually test the assumption that this Slugify instance title method is actually good, because it might not be. It is certainly testing and looking in the database for this new slug. So the challenge with this current test is the fact that, well, I'm not actually saving any of these tests at all, any of these slugs themselves, right? So it certainly is a poor side of this test. In other words, what I might consider doing is just upping the number of articles right here instead of in any given test. So that's actually an important metric to understand, is like when you are testing something like Slugify instance title where it's actually using the database, you're probably going to get errors like this, right? So 50,000 is not equal to 44,000. So the test itself just failed because of that. But again, it has to do with how the Slugify instance title is working anyway, and the fact that it is filtering in the database. So yeah, I'm going to fix this in a second. But the other part of this is the random.randint. Now, your intuition might be like, okay, well, this is pseudo-random, so it's not actually random. So what if I actually made these numbers, a lot bigger, like a lot bigger, right? 25 million, 100,000. Now, yeah, we're going to get a random number in there still, but it's also still certainly possible that this is still going to fail. So instead of having 50,000 here, what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and change this number to 50,000. And then down here, I'll just test to, 25. Now, the reason to test this to 25 is because up here, what we would end up doing is we're just testing all of the different slugs right here, right? So we're basically testing that it's not equal there. But yet again, I could still grab all of these items, which I will in a second, from that query set. Okay. So if that's not clear, just a refresher. The idea of testing a lot of things that rely on the database, so in this utility, relies on the database, it's best to set that up in the setup method. And thus, that's what we did here. So this will create all of those things. And then to really test that the Slugify instance title is working, one of the ways we could do it is say test Slugify instance title maybe 2 or Redux. We'll go ahead and say self. In this case, what we want to do is we want to actually get a list of all of those items. So what I'll say is slugs equals to the article.objects.all.values list, and we can pass in the field we want, and we can also say flat equals to true. So this is actually going to be a list. So slugs list or slug list, and then we'll go ahead and now again do unique slug list, and we'll put this equal to the list of the set of this slug list. Okay, and yet again, we will assert that length being equal, right? So none of these should actually be the exact same on either one of those tests, right? And this just happens to be a much smaller version of that, essentially just testing the function itself. This will also test that function too, but it's not testing it in the same way. It's just slightly different. It's more of like indirectly testing it, where this is directly testing it. Which is great. Okay, and also this number being a lot smaller means that we will be testing actual database instances too. So instead of doing 50,000 for the test, I'm just going to do 500 so you guys can see it in action. We run this again, and it will take a while, right? So it's literally creating 500. One of the ways to actually speed it up is to get rid of all of those print statements in there. So if we come in down here, let's get rid of those now. Okay, and okay. Cool. And then also notice that it ran those 6 tests in about 10 seconds and everything was good. So that includes my more recent one of the Slugify instance title Redux testing. And so let's actually give it a 50,000 number. I'll pause it and we'll see what the answer is there. So let's go ahead and run that, pause it. Okay, so this took 840 seconds. That's quite a while to just run this test to verify, but notice that it actually was successful. And so it did the same number of utility calls here, but this time it actually had unique slugs. So I think it's actually fair to say that that's most likely what's going to happen. So to improve the speed of this is not necessarily a trivial task. But there are ways to do it. In fact, a friend of mine named Adam Johnson wrote a book on speeding up tests altogether. So definitely check out that book, Speeding Up Django Tests. I'm going to leave this back at 500 because that's a little bit more manageable at this state in our project. But as you see, getting to a certain scale, it does have its own unique challenges when running tests. So one of the ways to fix that would be to have a persistent database for our tests. So literally, I'm not creating these every single time. I can create it once, and then they're in that testing database, which is outside the context of what I'm covering right now. So let me know if you have any questions on the tests. I think they're pretty straightforward. The general idea was, of course, to test that we actually created these items, then to test that the initial one actually just went off of the built-in Django Slugify function. Of course, that's unique to this particular Slugify function I did anyway. One of the things I did not test, though, is, of course, define test user added slug unique, right? So this is something I'm going to leave for you to test. And that is if a user went to go change their slug to, something that already exists like hello-world, I want you to actually go about testing that to ensure that that won't happen either. And of course, we already have items that would be in the database, so you'd essentially be testing off of that.